Planning Commission podcast is a spirited discussion with myself and a couple of my longtime colleagues in the profession. Our discussions are based solely on our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions or views of our employers, the American Planning Association, or even our alma maters. So grab a seat in the back of City Hall, dig out an old copy of Robert's Rules, and for goodness sakes, read your packet. The Planning Commission is now in session.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. Those people need a house too. Gosh dang, affordable housing. Something that we've been talking about it as a nation. It's been, the drumbeat continues to grow and grow and grow. And we are going to jump into that pool big time today because we need to. And I think it should be a bit, hopefully, cathartic. It also needs to be educational because sometimes us well-intended planners can be right in the middle of the way. And we need to figure out how to get out of the way. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. Fellow Commissioner Kostlik, good to see you again. First of all,
hello. Thank you.
And our substitute hitter coming off the bench, but with a heck of a, home run power is Lauren Driscoll. Lauren, thanks for substituting for Commissioner Smith while she just rubs it in our face while she's hanging out in the beaches of Mexico.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. All right. So affordable housing. First question to this group is, I'm just curious, what's the most unusual housing circumstance that you've ever had? Place that you've lived that's maybe a little bit different, some regard, whether it's physically, geographically, whatever it is. I'm curious, what did you have to do in order to, make it to the next day and keep on trucking? Where and how did maybe those folks help you out at a certain point in your life? I'm curious if either of you have experienced anything of that sort.
A mobile home in Cullowhee, North Carolina. When I was in college.
Single or double wide? Triple wide?
It was a single wide.
Right.
It was a single wide. It was in the floodplain. A bank of kudzu separated our kind of mostly college student trailer park from the more adult side of the trailer park there. And I do remember a couple of tornado warnings where we kind of went up to the newspaper office at the college I was going to because I was newspaper editor and basically slept on the couches there because that was a brick building. And us two little pigs in that mobile home were not going to stand up to much of that.
Kudzu, the state plant of North Carolina, I think, right? That was brought in from Japan. Awesome. So a single wide trailer. How old were you when that happened? You were college age, you said?
2021, and it had been apparently before us. The residents were into some pretty illicit sales of things because for the first couple of months we would get random people knocking on the door late at night, not expecting a hookup instead of what we were doing there, which was one part of it. And there was like random holes in the wall where they would stash their product as hiding it from there too. So yeah, that was wonderful.
But it was a roof over your head and a temporary time in your life. And, okay. Lauren, any memories from you as a youth or teenager or wide-eyed adult finding herself somewhere?
I think I'll kind of play off of what Don's talking about. I mean, nothing too crazy, but my family and I, we sold our house and we lived in a camper. Yeah, we lived in a vintage camper for 9 months and just drove around the West Coast. And I think, what Don's talking about, it's not just double wide, single wide.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're real mobile homes, like the kind that you see at the campground that people live in full time. And as a planner, I think that was one of those things that really hit me as we found different spots to park and met different people, that was their full-time lifestyle. And I think understanding, kind of what that's like and how bus stops had to be planned to pick kids up at a campground because that's where they were at. And as a planner, I had never thought to think about some of those locations as neighborhoods. I mean, they're a freaking subdivision. They've got
And I know a
That's
couple
what they are.
developers here in the Boise area that are trying to get essentially an RV park for that specific purpose on the housing, because, you know, we'll go around, as I'm sure you see in other cities. I mean, there's folks with older RVs and things that are parking in side streets and stuff as their place to live. I think it's an indication of the profound challenges in this country we're having right now with affordable housing.
Yeah.
And just housing availability.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, I mean, I like apartments, for example. I don't know how many different apartments I lived in with my dad, with my mom. There was post-divorce at one point in time. So it was just me and my mom. And, you know, hey, thank God for that. Right. And it was such a time it was a tumultuous time, but, you know, it's necessary, and we had to do what we had to do. And even as an adult, I know I've lived in many apartment complexes. It's a frustration of mine as a sitting commissioner when I hear that, right? Those people and come on, give me a break,
I
right?
was in a meeting up in Haley, Idaho, and it was a city-owned property in a neighborhood that they had been using as like an equipment storage yard. And the city then wanted to basically build 2 units on it that would be there for affordability purposes. And it was the same testimony. And one of the city council members went, you know who those people are?
Yeah.
It's my daughter who's a teacher. It's my
Right.
son-in-law who's a nurse at our local hospital. Those are the folks that need this housing in this location. And that's, you talking about them that way is insulting to me.
Oh, 100%.
And that's a universal thing. I mean, I can recall the meetings that I've sat in and heard those types of things said. Those people, you know, they're not like us. And I mean, it can be heartbreaking, because these are people in your community you worked with, and they have big hearts. And then you hear this kind of stuff, and it's like, exactly, it's the manager at the oil change place, it's the teacher, it's the para. All these people that, you know, have to be part of our community, and these other stakeholders and community pillars of the community who are just not seeing the connection between that affordable housing and their community.
Yeah. I will answer the question in the silliest of way, however, because I think it counts. I did get a chance. I did have to stay the night in a POW camp, not overseas, to clarify. U.S. military POW camp in the mountains of Maine, locked away in a very, very small space. How about that?
That's the latest Airbnb trend, by the way.
That's
micro unit.
That's a great point. Yeah, you too want to be treated. Yeah, it was intense, but it was man, rewarding at the end of it. You definitely were like, oh, this life is good when you got a bed and a roof and not a concrete slab and no food. So anyway, a different time in my life that was whole different. But anyway, let's head off to our whiskey pairing before we turn it over to a real affordable housing expert. So Don, what do you got for us? Those people need a house too.
And whiskey.
Whiskey.
So, I mean, if we think about what are we seeking with affordable housing, we're seeking a price point, right? That suits us and suits our budget, but we want quality in that too. We want, you know, all decent things that comes with that, and maybe not the former drug drop house that I was living in terms of that quality. So in combining the two and thinking about it, I'm going with a Dewar's 8-year-old blended Scotch whiskey, French cask smooth, that was done in apple brandy cask finish. And I say this because it's a very inexpensive, $24.95, but quality wise and age wise, it definitely pulls its weight in that arena. And having worked at a country club, a pretty ritzy one back when I was in that mobile home, I can say that the old men drinking Dewar's could outlast anybody at a fraternity party.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they had what do you call it? The stuff on their, what are those things called? The veins on your face after drinking that much over all those times. There's a band. Oh, now I got to think about it, what that term was. But anyway, did you say apple sherry cask? Is that what you said?
Apple brandy cask.
Apple brandy.
Finish.
Yeah, man, I have to try that out. All right.
Yeah.
Good selection. So with that, we're going to introduce our guest, Ms. Shellan Rodriguez, SMR Development. Man, Shellan, we're so happy for you to join us. Thank you for being on the Planning Commission podcast.
Thanks. Good to be here. My
Yeah.
first podcast.
There you
You
go.
good?
Oh, we'll be nice to you. So let's just start off with the basics. Shellan, tell the audience a little bit about your background, where you've come from, how do you ended up in this world of affordable housing?
Let's see. So my background is I don't have a master's degree or anything. I went to college at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana. I had a really good time in college. And it was in the 90s and it was a tough place to make a living. So I did a lot of bartending, I did a lot of serving, did some daycare work. And so I liked people, but I was looking at going back to school because that's kind of what you do in Western Montana in the 90s. You just like went back to school because you couldn't make a living. Or at least that's what I thought. So I was going back, I was trying to figure out what to go back to school for. And I was deciding I was going to go back to get an MSW, a master's of social work, because I wanted to help people. And my mother, who's a social worker, who has been very supportive of all decisions that I've made. And is like, you know, I was the generation of just grow up and do something that makes you happy. And like, don't worry about the details, you'll be fine. She was like, Shellan, I don't really think that's a good choice for you. Like, you're not social worker material. And at the time, it was kind of heartbreaking for me because I was like this, I had this decision. I was sort of like on this path. I'd taken a few classes. In retrospect, like mama knows best, like she was 100% right. I am not a kind-hearted enough patient person to work that closely with people who really do, you know, social workers really do have a special place in heaven, and I do not. So therefore, I ended up taking a job. It was kind of by chance, right? Like I ended up taking a job, a part-time job, still bartending at the Missoula Housing Authority,
Wow.
right? In the late 90s. And we were in the midst, and I came in right in the middle of disposing of 40 public housing units and then leveraging those funds to do all this other affordable housing development using tax credits and Section 202 and all these other funds that existed at the time. And so I just like, it was chance. I just dove in and had this really great opportunity and I loved it and I stuck with it. And part-time came to full-time and ended up working for a couple nonprofits and kind of government, quasi-government organizations around housing in Montana, and then went to work for a for-profit affordable housing developer here in Boise or in the Treasure Valley. And that's what got me here. And then I just like it, I'm in it. So it's been since the late 90s, so I'm old. 24 years.
Well, we're right there along with you with that. So that's
Like,
not
whoa, old. 20 some odd years, but the first couple were, I was pretty green. You know, my background was in sort of a liberal arts degree. I don't have like a construction management or, you know, real strong finance background from a formal education perspective.
Well, that's such an interesting caveat that, you know, getting into that housing authority world, because I mean, it brings kind of that whole local developer plus HUD money scenario together. And I think people just don't understand that they're more than Section 8, right? I mean, and the role that they play in affordable housing in a community, because it's a really specific role. I mean, they're not local government most of the time. They're not the feds. They're not a complete nonprofit. It's a really weird kind of, I don't know, mishmash of a lot of different roles, and they've got a lot of people to serve.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the, you know, housing authorities have a super interesting history, and I've been out of working for a housing authority for quite some time now, 22 or maybe 18 years, I would say. Yeah, I was there for 4 years. So whatever that is, but the breadth of what housing authorities across the country do is so diverse. Some are just really operations, and some are really doing incredible work, partnering, doing their own development. It's just all across the board, and sort of the capacity in which different authorities work in, but it is really quasi-government. Like it's got its own code. It's got its own, here in Idaho, it's got its own portion of the code. It doesn't run, it's not run by HUD, but it's not run by locals. It's they're sort of in between. It's really fascinating.
How does that differ between like a Missoula versus a major metro area? Have you seen in your work differences there? I think when I was in graduate school in Chicago Housing Authority, and it was the same kind of job opportunities and stuff there. It's a completely different set of circumstances and challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I've never worked at a housing authority like in a big city like that, but it's very different, I would imagine, just demographics, coupled with assets, right? Like we were disposing of 40 single family homes. It's like so weird to think of housing authorities owning a bunch of single family homes, but this is again, late 90s. But yeah, whereas like, you know, you go to Chicago or any bigger city, and it's like, it is very much dealing with the redevelopment of 1960s, 70s projects. I mean, I think that's kind of still what they're dealing with, if they haven't already, through the Hope 6 programs and programs that are sort of, some are still kind of in the works, some are sort of sunsetted, if you will.
So Shellan, I think like the question that whether we're in Chicago or we're in Missoula or we're in Kansas is what is and how do you define affordable? Because everybody, I don't know about you, but I hear this all the time. We need workforce housing, we need middle housing, we need affordable housing. And the question is, what
senior
is affordable?
housing?
Yeah. First time home,
missing
there's all
middle.
these words out there, but really I think the word that's most applicable to them all is affordable. And why is it right now such a thing?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I would say something different. I would say the word shouldn't be affordable.
Okay.
Because like in my mind, and it's not quite codified, but it's certainly an industry standard, right? It's like affordable housing is when you pay 30 to 35% of your income towards housing. It doesn't matter if you're a millionaire or if you're living off of $15,000 a year. What is affordable to you and your household is when you pay 30 to 35% of your income towards housing. And that allows you to pay for your transportation, to pay for your medical bills, to pay for all the things that you have to do to survive in this society. You know, when you go up to 40%, you're cost burdened. It's no longer affordable. I don't care if you're a millionaire or not, right? Like it doesn't, it is I guess I don't know the right words, but to me, that's what affordable housing means. So it is certainly a word that is used a ton. And right now, specifically, and to answer that question, like, why is it such a big deal now? I'd say because we stopped building.
Yes.
I mean, we stopped building. Like, yeah, it is a supply and demand issue. Is it that simple? No. But when your population grows, which we are growing exponentially, doesn't, you know, in the United States overall, our population is growing. You have to continue building homes if people are not going to live multi-generationally. And it's happening more and more that people do live multi-generationally. Is that by choice, by culture, for all the different reasons? But like, we need more housing and we stopped building.
Yeah.
So, and I mean that from, you know, the slowdown and the recession, the great housing recession of 2009, people sort of labor sort of fled. They went to go back to school. They went to go do all these different things that weren't creating units. And we got really behind. And I don't know Kansas markets, but I certainly know some markets in the Intermountain West and on the West Coast. You just see a lack of supply. And when there's a lack of supply, pricing goes up. And so affordability becomes harder regardless of where your income is. But like, you know, you've all seen the game, or you've all played the game, like, what is that, like is it Duck Duck Goose? It's not Duck Duck Goose. It's when the chairs go away.
Oh, musical chairs.
Musical chairs. Thanks. You know, like you take a chair away and the real estate of the other chairs becomes more valuable. And you know, the fastest person, the strongest person wins. And like, that's the deal, right? Like you stop producing housing, you have less housing. So the richest people get the housing regardless of of how safe and stable it is. So Did I answer your question? Or did I go
Yeah,
off on a
good
tangent?
start.
You saw Chris pumping his fist on your answer, so I think you hit it out of the
Well,
park.
so a couple things is one, history's repeating itself right now. The new start housing data came out last week, and we're now at about 1.4 million annualized homes. That's 300,000 fewer than what needs to be built on an annual basis to maintain what you're talking about for demand. And so it's likely going to continue to, that trough is going to get bigger again. And so just, to your point, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. I hate calling it affordable housing too. I like to call it, and have been trying to coin the term spectrum housing, meaning if we have a wage spectrum, just simply here's the number of people who hit a wage at XYZ as you go across, and here's the housing availability to match those wages. If those two lines are off, you got a problem, no matter what it is, right? And so that's really what it is. It boils down to math in a way. So my question to you is, you're a rock star in this world, but you've had a lot to overcome. So what are the biggest challenges, specifically some of the typical, development code type stuff, zoning issues? What are those types of things that you see frequently that planners can maybe help resolve?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, the real simple answer is like cost, right? Cost are the biggest challenge. But I feel like when people hear that, they can go a couple different directions. They can go like, oh yeah, we always hear that. Construction costs this, labor markets this, right? But like time is cost. So where I think a planner comes into play is creating certainty. And the faster the certainty, the better. But regardless, creating certainty. So when you have a scenario where you have to go get an approval, and I mean, this one, Chris, you'll appreciate this, and hopefully you'll appreciate this without being offended. So pardon me in advance. But like, you've got a planning commission meeting, and you've gotten your expensive architect in town for it, and you're on the agenda, and you're there, and you're sitting there for 4 hours, and then it's like time to go, and you don't get heard. Right. And that happens all over.
Yeah.
Like
they've just billed you at $250 an hour to sit there, right?
And like, you have to wait 3 more weeks, or maybe a month, or maybe you're not, and all of a sudden you don't have your entitlements. And in the affordable world, and I'm using that word because it's like the capital A affordable, using low-income housing tax credits or other sources of public funds, you've got hard deadlines to when you can apply for those funds. It's not like you just go in for a bank loan. So if you've created a timeline around needing to apply for those funds at some arbitrary date that another agency sets for you, October 1, and you've scheduled to go in, on August 15th, and then you get pushed, you've got, you're up against a time frame that, like, you might lose a year, lose a week, lose a month, lose a day. What is it? Lose a day, lose a week, lose a month, lose a year. Like, I've seen it happen. And that's the kind of stuff, that's just an example, but an example of how, like, the lack of certainty in the planning process can create real costs and can really decrease the ability of a community to get, if their goal is housing, right? If that's part of their goal, they can really decrease the chance of them getting it. So from a planner's perspective, like, just like, do what you said you're going to do, man. Like,
But that's universal. It is so good to hear you as a subject matter expert on this, Shellan, say that, because we're experiencing some growth here in my community here in Kansas. And when we looked at like what we could do to better our housing development situation, it wasn't labor, it wasn't materials, it was government needs to create certainty. And we heard that from the KC metro area. We heard that from Oklahoma City, from our friends in Nebraska, just trying to learn best practice. And it's been impressive in adopting a policy where we had stringent timelines to keep to, in addition to what the developer was trying to keep to. It kind of you knew if you were getting in the gate, you made it past certain things like, you know, certain price points or certain access to walkability or certain parks. If you could answer those questions, you were already in the queue. Now, how much of an incentive you would get, whether it's property tax abatement or, you know, something like that, you wouldn't know till that final decision, but there was certainty that you were in the line, right? And I think we've seen it be successful. So thank you for confirming that we're doing something right.
I just think it's important for planners to understand that, you know, like you guys can't control labor and cost of lumber, cost of steel. I mean, you can't control that. So don't try, right? You can control your processes and, you know, incentivize and create more certainty and more timeliness around those projects that you want to see. So if affordable housing is your jam, like fast track those or assign somebody those to like shepherd them through. I mean, that's like one of the biggest things, you know, when I go into communities that say, oh, you're doing affordable housing, like, okay, what does that really mean? And I'm like, no, that really means I'm going to be using public funds and I'm going to be doing, you know, 80% and below with an average of 60%, which is like a typical tax credit, low income housing tax credit deal. And they're like, oh, okay. You really are doing affordable housing. And therefore, like, here's your project manager. And this person is going to shepherd you through our process because like, it's a confusing process for people who don't have planning background sometimes. And
confusing planning process? No.
So
the federal government would never
huge.
confuse anything with that stuff.
No.
Here's your intern.
So-
They're going to help you get this through. No problem. They're very well versed.
They know everything.
Well, and I know Don's going to ask you a question in just a second, but man, to your point, conditional use permit, anybody? Because we had a hearing a month ago where somebody piped up about the virtues of conditional use permit being, a beautiful thing to help. And I'm like, yeah, I can see that point. Yeah, but have you looked at the history of the CUP? Because it's not exactly a great one. It's totally the thumb of the elites being put on developers such as yourself and others, and for all of the reasons we know over time in history, right? And just saying, we think you're going to be entitled, but why don't you just come see us anyway, and we're just going to make sure it's all good, right? And so to your point about
that's in that CICP
timeliness.
Ethics thing, Chris, you're not supposed to do. We've all seen the question. You can't accept the $3 cup of coffee.
Right. So anyway, go ahead, Don. I know you got a question.
I mean, I've found through the years, Shellan, I've had developers come in and just give presentations to classes I've taught. And I've always been like, to go out and be a property developer and get castigated the way they do as a public, they've got some, for lack of a better word, cojones that I don't have in terms of the money that has to go out the door before you even turn dirt or sell the first unit. So you've got that part of it, as well as the public sentiment. How do you overcome the perceptions related to just not only being a developer, but working in the affordability arena?
That's a good question.
There's no secret sauce for it.
No, I mean, that it's a really good question. And like different communities view developers differently and different communities view affordable housing differently. So, as somebody who works in a handful of different markets, and I'm pretty small time, right? Like sometimes I do a lot of owner representation, project management. Sometimes I I partner on my own deals, but I mean, at the end of the day, like I have a pretty small amount of assets out there. But with that said, the worst communities are those where the planners don't respect the applicants. In those, I shouldn't say the worst, the hardest communities for me to work in are those in which you are automatically at odds with the planner. And like the system creates that, and it's two different personalities, I think also, right? Like you have to be in my business, you cannot have thin skin. You don't, I mean, you like the rules, you like the certainty, but you will always, I mean, we push, like we will always push.
Yeah.
And, you know, the planners that I know, really like things black and white. It's really like, does that box get checked or not? And I think that it can work well when there's certainty in the process and the planners can get their boxes checked, right? And get their questions answered, and the developers can know what those are. But where it gets really icky is when the planner just automatically doesn't trust the developer or the applicant because of, you know, some history or some other deal, or like, you know, because they've been burned. And like, not all developers are great, not all planners are great, right? But like, so I think in a lot of communities, developers have a bad rap. Affordable housing developers, I think, are a little bit, I think we get a little bit of a more, I'd like to think we get a little more graciousness. Like, you know, I mean, there is part of what we do that is for the betterment of all, right? I mean, like I started it, I got into this because like, I needed a job, but more importantly, like at the end of the day, I wanted to help people. And like, I don't have to actually deal with that many people. Right? Like I can go to sleep at night thinking like, okay, what I'm doing is really good for this community or that community, and it's helping people, but I don't have to like really be in the trenches in that sense, like the way a social worker or a doctor or, you know, an ER doc in inner city would have to be. Like, I can't handle it.
Yeah.
But so I guess I just say that I think sometimes in some communities, there's a little bit of graciousness that an affordable housing developer comes in, until it's in your backyard. Until it's in your backyard.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we're the worst. And that comes to the second part of your question, which is the public sentiment. And you know, you guys all touched on it, and I mean, you're all smarter than me, and you touched on it in a much better way than I would have early on in this podcast, which is, this is housing that meets the spectrum of needs of a community to keep the economics of the community alive. And so when you stop meeting the needs of a portion of your community, you're not creating a full spectrum of a community, right? Like if you don't have a place for people who teach and, you know, low-level nurses to live, then you're going to have to cart them out from your suburbs, or, you know, you're going to add a cost burden of transportation to them, and you're going to create a scenario where you might not get your services when there's a storm, or you know, the power line guys might not be able to service your power lines when there's a natural disaster. Like, we're creating this if you don't want those people or that spectrum, that slice of the pie in your community. So,
well, we had a guest on a couple
an
weeks ago
education
that he'd said, his quote was, this was a state DOT director. He said, you know, Walmart jobs and executive housing do not create a jobs housing balance in a community. And it got right at that point. Lauren?
Well, I guess as we talk about affordable housing, we've talked about price points. What we really haven't talked about is product. Affordable housing comes in a lot of shapes and sizes these days. I mean, it can be everything from the traditional stick-built home to tiny houses to garden apartments, townhomes, and everything in between. I'm curious, Shellan, what you think is kind of the future of this affordable housing market. We've talked about the numbers. We've talked about YIMBYs, NIMBYs. Do you think product is part of that future? What are you seeing?
Well, so like, to be honest, I deal mostly in strict multifamily, right? So I do apartments, right? Mostly. I'm actually kind of working on a home ownership deal in a high amenity resort community. That'll be really interesting. I'm sure I'm going to learn a ton. But so I also don't want to, I don't want to miss the opportunity to mention, you know, the single wides and double wides, Mobile home
Mhm.
parks are amazing affordable housing, right? Like, so
You mean the original tiny house?
the original,
Before we put them on HGTV,
right,
this
like
was a
before they
thing.
were,
And also,
they were
and also a method for some ownership and all the other things we talk about with that American dream that isn't necessarily fully a rental or an apartment. And that's the part that gets me about that as a tool in the opposition to it.
totally. No, that's a really good point. And I wish I don't get it. I don't have a lot of experience in that realm, but it is really fascinating to me. That point that you just made. So what was the question? How, what is affordable housing going to look like by form? There's not an answer. I don't think. Like, we need density, right? Especially in communities that are growing, just to get to that supply. But that's not to say that a more rural community doesn't need a mobile home park, or, I mean, like tiny homes. I don't really. I guess maybe I've never lived in
Are
one.
you feeling over it?
I'm kind of over it. Like, I mean, what's a tiny home really like? Just make it cheaper.
Yeah.
It's a small home. Like, why does wheels matter? Like, I don't get it. I just don't really get it.
So
That's because I don't do it. So I'm just sort of like, I don't know, I'm not, it's like that, I'm an apartment builder. I get apartments. You talk to me about tiny homes with wheels on. I'm like, well, just take the wheels off and put them on a slab. Like, what's the big deal?
yeah.
But that's ignorance. I get it, I'm sure. But so I think it really does look in all different ways. And yes, I deal kind of in that lower end for a lot of what I do, because it's frankly, there is a system and a more certain process out there. It's not easy. It's not easy, and it takes a lot of brain damage. I mean, I've done market rate deals and I've done low-income housing deals, and a market rate deal any day of the week is more simple, more quick, and more money, period. But there is a certainty around an affordable deal where you've got your allocation, how much you're going to get, how much you're qualified to get, what you need to do to get it. So there's that. And then there's there's the middle part, which people call missing middle, workforce, whatever. It's like, folks who don't qualify for all the federal funds, but they're not, because of the market that they live in, they can't, go out and buy a home, right? There's a ton of people in that realm. And like, what do they need? They need just straight up apartments. They need just straight up townhomes for rent. They need just simple first-time home buyer type of first-time home ownership product that can look all different. It can look all different ways, but not everybody wants to live in a 400 square foot home. Like me and my husband and my two boys, who are like not quite at junior high. I mean, they're like in late elementary. Like, we've got a pretty tiny home now. It doesn't have wheels and it wouldn't qualify as a tiny home, but it's a pretty small home. And I get sick of hearing them.
Oh, there's a lot of togetherness. I have an 11-year-old.
That's where you turn that tool shed into the ADU for them, so you can just kind of put them out there and
I'm like,
deal with
I don't even need to call it an ADU. I just call it the tool shed. Like, that's just where you go. Like, you don't need heat. You don't need, like, you just go out there.
Yeah.
But so the tiny home thing, I don't really get it. I mean, I'm sure it has a really important place. I could see it. Yeah, I don't know.
So I know we've been doing some work in some communities here in Idaho that don't come up in our state's discussions about affordability. Everything talks about Boise and Sun Valley and that, and I think that's pretty common. But a town of 10,000 in central Idaho says we have ag-based businesses that want to relocate or expand here, but they won't because of housing, not just affordability, but availability. Down in a community near Utah, our industrial park is full. We have employers coming in, but people are having to live in Utah because we don't have homes for them here on the Idaho side of the border. Who else do you need help from to get that message and understanding across to policymakers, to planners, to anybody that will listen and try to understand that?
In a lot of ways, I think planners get it. If they can get over the big bad developer or whatever, right? Like, I think like oftentimes they get it, at least at least in my experience, to me, the policymakers are so far removed from whether it's the time in their life or they've just been privileged that they haven't ever lived in an apartment, or they're just, their memories are so short, right? Like, we've all lived in
we've all had that. We've all been those people, right? I mean, that's the
listening to your conversation. And like, I think a lot of people have, but maybe especially in more rural Intermountain West states, like, our legislature is, they're old guys mostly. Well, in Idaho, we have quite a few women, but they're older. And so maybe they just are so far removed from that time in their life, or they're so privileged that they just can't relate.
Do you think it's much of like, I mean, I hear so much, well, that's a market thing. We have no control or way to intervene in that. And that seems to be like a way to end the conversation rather than the actual reality.
Sure. I mean, like, oh yeah, we don't control the market. Like you can say that about anything and it's baloney. Like it's baloney, right? Like, no, you don't fully control the market, but if you want to create places where you can build density, that helps create a marketplace for high dense housing. Yeah. I mean, right? Like
even that uncomfortableness we were talking about with the NIMBYs, it can filter up into your decision-making bodies. I think sometimes when even the market is saying you need a different type of product, apartments, studios, micros, whatever, and you'll start to hear those voices that say, well, who really lives in that? Well, people live in that. Yeah. So we got somebody to come talk to us about apartments, but we're questioning the size of it. And it's like, yes, somebody's going to live in this and it has to be in our community. It might not be in your backyard, but we're going to have to find a spot for it.
And right there is where they're meddling with the market, right? When you start regulating that kind of stuff instead of so that's, I always love those vicious circles that those get in, but it doesn't help in the end to help us solve these problems.
But I think, Dawn, you did sort of start there with an answer I would give that I see it more and more, and which is just employers, right? Because employers, the last few years have had to, they've had to think about housing, right? In different ways, I would argue, at least in my career, than they used to have to. And so it does broaden the folks who are charging the charge, right? Like it broadens the people who are in the discussion when you bring in employers and they're like, I'm not a growth person or an anti-growth person. I'm not a planner. I'm not a developer. I just need a place for my people to live.
And I can say from our experience here, and you'll probably know who I'm talking about. I mean, a very big hospital is basically stepping in and going, we're going to build workforce housing. We're going to try to work stuff in this market. We're going to do things for the city. And the good part is that's hard to ignore when an entity like that is starting to tap on your shoulder and say it's a problem, but also, hey, we're willing to step in and work on this.
Yeah, totally. And I think hospitals are in a really unique position to do that because they have such a spectrum within their employees are from super low hospitals, university, any of those institutional types of uses, because like, manufacturing, we were talking a little bit earlier about like, okay, a big manufacturer wants to come to town in some of these rural communities. And it's like, okay, do we want to build a bunch of maybe it's seasonal for farm workers or like that? How does that help the community? It does help the community by creating those economic drivers, but it is harder than a hospital who has all of those spectrums. Yeah. And they need housing availability from their janitors to their surgeons. And, I did work up in Blaine County for a hospital up there. And they're like, oh, no. This isn't just the cafeteria workers and the lower level nurses. Like, why would a doctor making $450,000 a year come to this community when they can live in Idaho Falls and make just as much money and have, a third of the cost? And it's like, ooh, I mean, hopefully they like to ski maybe, but like, it gets really tricky.
Well, I think we're emerging, and I know you brought up Montana, and I know outside of Bozeman, Montana, that hospital up there flat out built housing. Period. Stop. And I look at it and I think you go back in our culture 100, 120 years ago, and you have these mill towns that were set up, because of the great big manufacturer, and they flat out had to build houses for their workers. Now, it didn't go very well because they didn't want to maintain it and all of that sort of stuff. But I think that we're entering that age without a doubt where that's coming back full circle, and you're kind of going, well, look, you need employees, they need housing, and guess what, man, you're in the housing game whether you realize it or not, or you want to be or not, right? And I think we're there for sure. So
Yeah, it's a good point.
all right. So I think we need to transition to our lightning round. This is a topic that might need a part two. It is, it's there's so many things that I
3 and 4 and 5.
Yeah. What are those specific things that we as planners need to do? Who do we need to convince? I think the YIMBY movement in and of itself might even warrant its own episode, because I know for me, when I am having to face a decision and I hear people saying this is needed, this is wanted, and please do this, it helps. It really does help, to have that voice. And all the other aspects, the lending component of it, that I know is another challenge, and the attention of redlining and what that meant, and how we're hopefully away from that, although I'm not sure we are. I'm guessing that there's some things that we don't even know about that still exist behind the scenes. So anyway, but with that, that's my long way of saying, hey, let's ask some fun questions. I want to ask the first question. You mentioned that you at one point in time in your life were a bartender. Is that right? Okay. What's the very worst drink someone could ever order that just messed up your whole flow of getting your job done?
Well, I mean, I do want to is this supposed to be really fast? I'm kind of wordy. You said lightning round.
Somewhat, yeah. It's not a prolonged lightning.
Let me just put it this way. The bar that I worked at was amazing, and it got me through college. If the ingredients were not in the name of the drink, we didn't serve it. So this was in the 90s. This was like before the cocktail.
So like
bar.
somebody came up there and said a Sazerac, you're like, what?
Yeah.
What? No, you want Jack and Coke or Sprite? And
yeah. Or press, like we were, it was Montana, like press, you want a bourbon press. Okay, got it. Right. But so, I mean, in that bar, we were fast. We were like, we served a lot of people. So when those people would show up to be like, oh, can I get a martini?
I like the accent. What part of Montana has that accent, by the way?
No, those were the people John Dutton's trying to keep. Yeah, it's the people John Dutton's trying to keep out of Montana that would step up and do that.
Guys, we don't have a martini glass here. And our vermouth has been on the shelf for there's a layer of dust on it.
It's just for looks. Just got it.
So okay, I'm not super classy like that.
So I have a question. So since you're in Idaho, home of potatoes, what is your favorite way to eat potato?
Roasted.
Okay.
Roasted.
Straight up. Simple.
Yeah. What's the last concert you've been to?
She's really thinking hard on that one. Weird Al.
I love live music, so I'm just like, who did I see last? God, I guess maybe it's been too long.
You weren't at the Black Label Society Anthrax show that I was at, where I didn't.
No, my husband made a bit. No, we went and saw Bonnie Raitt. I mean, that's kind of boring. It was a great show, but that's kind of boring.
We went to that show and we were told, sit down, don't dance, because it's a bunch of 80-year-olds going, don't you dare block my view. Like,
get off my lawn.
When I realized I'm at the wrong show.
Well, how did I forget this? I just saw Little Feet. I mean, they're old. Talk about old.
Wow.
But they have like a whole. There's only one guy who's still around. I can't remember his name, but they have the new guitar, the guitarist guy. He's a total badass, super fun. I mean, I was kind of like a jam band girl. I was at University of Vermont in the late '90s.
Oh wow,
mid '90s.
Oh, you skipped right over your Vermont time. Oh, okay.
I did skip over that. I was only there for a couple semesters.
Yeah. All right. So you have done a lot of development in the state of California. I'd like you to choose one word to describe the planning process and development process in that state? What word comes to mind?
Long.
There you go. That sounds about right. I was just told by somebody here that I'm happening to visit that is in the development game that their rather simple application took 4 years. And it's
Mhm.
just the development agreement. It's not even going into the actual, preliminary plat stages at this point. So
That's like those
Yeah.
fence permits you
It-
talk about, Lauren, take 18 months down there, right?
the Hoover Dam took that long.
Whatever. I got a 10-day turnaround time.
It is highly, highly regulated, but I would say this. In a lot of the work that I do down there, it is multifamily, like capital A affordable, and their laws and their funding sources are changing so quickly. The last couple of years have really been different. So like all of their CEQA, which is their version of the environmental NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. They have CEQA, California Environmental Q. I'm spacing on the Q right now, but
California
Quality.
Environmental Quality Act.
Yeah.
quality. Thank you. Like it's all like their California's leadership, for better or for worse, has like you're in affordable housing, you are fast tracked in ways that I can't hardly even keep track of.
Well, isn't it
Um,
true too that like per city, like within city limits, it's calculated on a state level using like an algorithm that if you have X amount of space, X amount of people, you have to have a certain amount of affordable housing come through your planning commission every year. Otherwise, you can't do the other stuff.
Well, otherwise you don't get funded. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the housing element. No, but for you, they've had that for years, but you still had to go through CEQA, which could take years and just was fraught with litigation. Right. I mean, because then you can always, I mean, I've had projects stopped because of like a seasonal shrimp, like the fairy shrimp. It's a real thing. Google it. It's like was there for like a month or something. And I mean, I'm all about the environment, whatever, but like a fairy shrimp in this field that's been like totally utilized for really nasty agriculture for the last 50 years, like that it's fine for that to go away in my humble non-biological.
Okay, I've got a question
biologist.
about this. It's probably not lightning round, but like that's all well and good when you've got a state that's bumping along economically. It could be its own country as far as gross domestic product. But what about when you're not the popular kid, when you don't have development knocking on the door? I mean, how do you think about those policies being applied in more rural places where you're just happy somebody wants to build something?
Well, no, I mean, I think that's exactly it. California is different. Like they are different. No, when you are not in Idaho, I mean, Southern Idaho, Boise right now, we're different. Like people want to be here, period. Like whatever we do, people are coming, like it doesn't matter. But, no, I mean, those other places you need to incentivize, like market yourself, like be the place to bring the business so that business brings the people. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
So when you're going on vacation, Shellan, are you like, do you ever look at Verbo and Airbnb given what they've caused to affordable housing, or you just kind of blow through that, or you just strictly hotels.com?
I think he just asked you, are you a blatant hypocrite or just a partial?
I mean, I am guilty of being some level of a hypocrite.
We all are. We all are.
I
It's
am
not
guilty.
bad, right?
Yeah.
Like I going into someone's home and being able to cook a meal for a couple days as opposed to having to relegate yourself to the greasy spoon on the corner. There's something nice to be said for that.
Or just learning about a neighborhood you would never visit otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, then the Quality Inn usually isn't sitting there, so.
Yeah, I do both. And I mean, like these days our vacations are like, I got a family, like we go wherever our family is. Like what's really a vacation?
Well, you're living for your boys, right? You mentioned, and so all kinds of wild times. Yeah. Well, I think you've already sort of laid the foundation for said episode number 2, just planning in other states, rural planning and affordable housing. And I told you, this is one that can just keep going and going and going. But I think we should probably bring this to a close for now, put a cork in it and revisit it at another date. But Shellan Rodriguez, thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy, and sorry, the planning profession has clearly gotten in your way. We'll work on making that change and hopefully expediting the process for you. But thank you for joining us today.
Sure thing. It's been fun. Appreciate you guys.
All right. Well, to our audience, hit up the website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. All the social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, we're all there. Just keep typing away Planning Commission Podcast and you'll find us. I guarantee it. Fellow commissioners, thank you for having us today. Thank you for joining us. Lauren, oh my gosh. Thank you for jumping in. Appreciate it on short order, nonetheless. Just a couple of days ago. Yeah.
Hey, that's good. I've got some coming up I might have to miss. So I think you'd be a suitable.
Yeah. There we go.
Stand in for that.
Sounds good. All right. I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion made.
Second.
Perfect. Thank you all. Appreciate it. We'll keep doing our best and trying hard. See you on the flip side. Have a good one. Bye. Hey, everybody. Commissioner Danley here. Would you like to see more? Hear more? Well, we got you covered. Go to our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. It's got everything you want. Guests, yep, past episodes, the video, the audio, even our whiskey pairing, links to everything about all the people we've had on, books, websites, you name it. It's unbelievable. If you want to reach out to us, please. We'd be more than happy to chat. You can email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. You want to tweet at us, go for it, @planningcommish. We're also on YouTube with the Planning Commission Podcast channel, Facebook. Heck, send us a carrier pigeon if you need to. We'd love to hear from you about ideas, guests, you name it. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll keep doing our thing. You keep doing yours. Have a good one.